real conversations, and some hard truths. Gangs, drugs, and guns. Giving a voice to those willing to sacrifice. We have stories that need to be told. We have lessons that need to be taught. Protect and serve. Welcome to The Quiet Professional. Hey everybody, welcome back. Nathan Rome is with you. Today we are going to be talking about frontline medicine and trauma response. For that, I have Brandon Griffith on the show. Brandon is a former EMT and now serves as a deputy sheriff for the Pinal County Sheriff's Office in Arizona. At 26 years old, he dropped dead in his home from out of hospital sudden cardiac arrest due to an electrical malfunction in his heart. Now he's one of, if not the only police officer in America to return to full active duty with a defibrillator implanted in his chest. Also, he is the founder and CEO of Griffith Blue Heart nonprofit, which specializes in preparing, training, and equipping law enforcement for time-sensitive medical emergencies like cardiac arrest and hemorrhage control. Brandon is the recipient of congressional recognition for his actions as a police officer and his life-saving programs. He's married with 2 daughters, so that really puts the importance of life-saving skills into perspective. So, welcome, Brandon.
One boy and one girl. My son's going to be offended you said that, but it's all good.
I think the bio you sent might have actually said 2 daughters. I'm pretty sure.
Oh man, yeah, I got one boy, one girl, and they're my everything, man. That's my wife. So thanks for having me on, brother.
Awesome. Well, hey, I'm glad to get you in here. I think we're going to have a much needed conversation. This is some super important stuff. And you know what? Outside of taking the CPR and first aider course every 3 years, I don't think first line or frontline people get any real experience with this stuff. So, it's the training and stuff is going to be a much needed conversation. So, I'm glad to have you here. If we could just talk a little bit about you to start and kind of your background. So I mentioned in the bio that you are a former EMT, so you've got some of the medical side already, but talk about where you came from and just how you kind of got into this role where you are today.
Yeah, man, I'm an Arizona native, born and raised. So the Grand Canyon State in the U.S. is where I'm from, and you know how it is, man. The cops and firefighters and military members we work with, there's this innate desire to serve and do something, and I had that ever since I was a young kid. You know, I was that ADHD nightmare kid that terrorized all my teachers and got in way more trouble than I should have. And the only thing that could really drive my focus was martial arts. And growing up in the martial arts school, I grew up around military and law enforcement that, you know, smacked me across the face when I needed it and taught me how to walk like a man and act like a man. And kind of threw me on my life path. You know, in high school, I became a lifeguard, started working as that, and I went into private security as soon as I was old enough. Working in private security, I was constantly responding to medical emergencies, even working at like hotel properties. We had, you know, suicide attempts and guests fainting and collapsing and heart attacks and overdoses and all kinds of stuff. So I got thrown into it and I wanted to do more. So I became an EMT. And the very first time I ever did CPR, I was in high school.
Wow.
And then, you know, growing up with all these guys from military and law enforcement, I knew I was going to go down that path, but I fell in love with my high school sweetheart. And there was no way I was going to risk that relationship and joining the military and being away from her. So I decided to focus my attention on law enforcement.
Okay.
So I got into law enforcement as early as I could and jumped in with, you know, head first, and haven't left yet. 16 years, I'm still here.
Awesome stuff. Maybe I'll kind of ask about that first experience when you're doing CPR on someone. So I've only had to do it one time in 10 years of policing. I'm just wondering, like, having that experience in high school, though, what are kind of your thoughts around that? And afterward, maybe you could kind of give us your thoughts during it and then your thoughts afterwards. Like, I would imagine some people might actually find that kind of traumatic because you're very close to death, or, you know, just seeing someone that's really struggling for life. So what was that like?
That's something that's always going to be burned in me. You know, one of the guys that worked at the bell desk called me on my personal cell that day, and he just said, "Hey, you used to be a lifeguard, right?" I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Get over here. This guy's dying. I already called 911." So it was a big resort property with like a water park, and it was spread out with casitas and whatnot. So I jumped on a golf cart and got over to this area, and the guy was lifeless, laying on the ground, changing all kinds of different colors. I mean, he wasn't even spasming or anything. So back then, CPR was a joke. Back then when it was 5 to 1, and then it changed it to 15 to 2. We were still doing breaths, and the focus was really on respiratory back then. So I was doing CPR the way I was trained, and I still remember the taste in my mouth. I remember the guy's sweating. I remember his breath, all that nasty stuff. I worked on him for,
Yeah.
I think it was 9 to probably close to 11 minutes. But while I'm doing CPR on the guy, his wife and his daughter walk up on me, and they were actually at the resort celebrating their daughter's like fourth birthday. So I'm literally watching them as they're watching me work on their dad, and I still remember their faces crystal clear. And working on him. Finally, fire department shows up. They take over. He doesn't make it. He had no chance. I mean, he had been down for several minutes before I got there. I at least did, CPR on him for 11 something minutes. And back then, when you were doing breaths, especially with 5 to 1, the brain was getting no kind of perfusion. So he had almost no chance. And if he would have survived, he probably would have been in a vegetative state. So I remember losing him, and I remember that feeling, being in high school and not being able to save someone's life, doing what I was trained to do, and having that feeling, and it sucks. And unfortunately, it's a feeling that all too many first responders and people out there have experienced. Heart disease is our number one cause of death globally, and it's something that we all know have a loved one that has some kind of heart issues or diabetes or some kind of complication that at some point we're all going to face our mortality. So at 15, I didn't want to have that feeling again. That's when I was like, all right, as soon as I'm old enough, I'm going to enroll in an EMT program and learn how to do this a little bit more efficiently, and that's what I did.
Wow. I imagine most people don't even know what to do if somebody's just choking, let alone something more complicated, right? Something more complex. And well, then you have children and you see these things, and it makes you really realize just how precious life is, and how quick things can change, especially doing the policing work. So let's talk a bit about your experience personally. So you at 26 have cardiac arrest. And can you talk a little bit about maybe, I guess, your medical history leading up to that? Do you have anything that even kind of precipitated this, or warning signs? And then what was the whole experience like for you?
Yeah, so everyone wants to jump to there's got to be something wrong. There's got to be a
Mhm.
genetic component. He had to have a congenital defect. He had to have something. Maybe you're eating too many cheeseburgers or slamming too many energy drinks. Everybody wants to rationalize it, right?
Yep.
But the reality is that cardiac arrest, which is an electrical malfunction, can happen to anyone, anytime, anywhere. From the time you were in the womb until the day you die, your heart sends these electrical impulses. It causes the four chambers in your heart to beat in the right sequence. One misfire is all it takes, like a brain aneurysm. Just one misfire, and you go into either ventricular fibrillation or ventricular tachycardia, which is known as cardiac arrest, and you drop dead. It's like someone flips a light switch. So before this, after that incident at the hotel, I had a friend in college die. He was a phenomenal athlete. He played college football. He was a buddy of mine that I worked with. He was at home for Christmas break playing basketball at the gym when he collapsed. He had a cardiac arrest, and of course, the AED was locked in some manager's office who had taken an early break, and no one could get to it. And
Mm.
everyone wanted to wait for professionals, so no one went hands on with him. He didn't make it. So, I mean, it's incidents like that, and then becoming an EMT and responding to it, and then working in the private sector and going hands on with people that I got. It surprises me when I hear people say they haven't done CPR before, because I've had such a close relationship and had to do it so many times even before I got into law enforcement, that it just blows my mind when people don't have that much hands-on experience with it.
Yeah.
So here I am. I'm 26 years old. I'm a defensive tactics instructor. I'm a field training officer. I'm in phenomenal shape. I had just made my goal of becoming a SWAT operator 2 weeks before. And as you know, in law enforcement, it's a quite in-depth test between written exams, between physical tests, between medical examinations, between shoots and decisions and oral boards and all that stuff. They don't just pick anybody to work on the SWAT team. And I had just made the team 2 weeks before my cardiac arrest. So things were going in great. I was not slamming energy drinks. There was no drug use. There was no supplements. I wasn't taking any of that garbage. I mean, I was literally at home with my wife reading a book. I sat with her. She was on the computer working. I was on our couch in our den. I stood up and said, "Hey, I'm going to take the dog out," patted him on the head, and I took 2 steps towards my den door, and it was just like, You ever had someone jump out and scare you, man?
Yeah.
You know, when your heart skips that beat, you get that weird flutter. Well, imagine that fluttering feeling, but you cannot recover from it. So
Mm.
even though I collapsed within about a second and a half, I experienced time distortion. Everything just slowed way down. So I remember sitting there going, bearing down and just going, oh, that's not right. And I remember not being able to breathe. And I remember just my jugular veins distending and just stopping dead in my tracks and going, oh, something's wrong. And at this point, my heart is just in this like fluttering electrical storm, and there's nothing I can do on it. So I tried to revert back to training. You know, Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman teaches you combat breathing, box breathing, whatever you call it, and where you're from. Turns out when you're in cardiac arrest, there's no blood being pumped to your lungs, so they physically cannot expand with oxygen. So I was sitting there doing what's called agonal breathing, basically convulsing, trying to force myself to breathe. My wife hears this. She turns around to look at me, sees my face as the darkest purple she'd ever seen, like someone choked a Smurf, right?
Mm-hmm.
So she looks at me and she immediately pulls out her phone to call 911 as I collapse backwards and I fall into my bookshelf. And this was at a different house. It's not the one behind me. But I collapse. I break all the tears on the way down. She goes to kind of catch me. Now, my wife is about 5'3". I'm 6'4". So I topple right over her and put my head through the wall. I land on my hands and my knees and I'm looking out in my hallway. And my vision's going to tunnel vision, but it's not like on the streets. You know, when you got adrenaline dumping, it's just kind of hard to focus. It wasn't like that. My vision was this dark, purplish, almost black, and everything was kind of fluttering and closing in on me. I remember that sitting there. Here I'm a cop. Here I'm an EMT. I got multiple life-saving medals at this point, but there isn't a damn thing I can do to save my own life. And that feeling of helplessness is not something I wish on anybody.
Mm.
I remember looking down to my hallway and just going, well, this is it. Boom. And I dropped dead right there. My wife rolls me on my back. She starts doing compressions. She did phenomenal. I mean, luckily she went to the same EMT class I did, and she had just been accepted to Midwestern Medical University. She hadn't started. She was going to start that fall, but she started working on me, and I was in lockjaw. So she was trying to smack me out of it at first, and she wasn't getting the depth that she wanted to. So she actually had the presence of mind to put my feet up on the couch in our den in a position called Trendelenburg.
Okay.
We use that in the field for patients who are in shock. Basically, all the oxygenated blood that's in your legs has gravity forcing it down to your core. And I can't get ER doctors to think like that. And she did that while working on her high school sweetheart. So she was compressing away on me, working on me. We didn't have an AED in the home. The first responder was a fellow police officer. So she stops working on me, goes to unlock the door, pull the dog back. The police officer was not equipped with an AED. He comes in, sees me down on the floor, and gets to work. He starts compressing away. He does a phenomenal job. I mean, he got his depth. He got his full recoil. He was putting everything he had into it. He worked on me until about the 9.5, almost 10-minute mark when fire and EMS arrived. They dragged my body to the living room where they got more room to work. The IO drilled me. They started doing they dropped the OPA, cut off one of my favorite Nirvana shirts. They go to town. They shocked me multiple times, but all in all, I wasn't resuscitated until about 16 minutes and 48 seconds. So 16 and a half minutes, I was dead on the floor. My wife and the crew said that I kind of sat up and started pushing guys off me. I don't remember that part. When I came back, I remember nothing but pain. Like I remember my chest feeling like it was caved in from all the compressions. I could taste blood in my mouth from the OPA. My leg had been drilled through. My arms and legs, felt like pins and needles, right? Like, when you fall asleep on it, you get that painful pins and needle feeling. Well, imagine that on steroids. But my head was the worst of all, man. I just felt like, someone was taking a sledgehammer to the top of my head with every heartbeat. I'm getting that white flash, like the worst kind of migraine pain I can ever describe. So my wife says I sat up and was trying to push these guys off me. She grabs me by my face, says, "Don't leave me." And I said, "I won't," before I collapsed back on the gurney. Now, from that moment, I don't remember much the next 5 days. I remember I could feel the sway of the gurney and I could hear the firefighters walking on the rocks in my front yard, but I don't remember much. According to the crew, I was in the back of the ambulance, cracking jokes, calling them hose draggers. I don't remember any part of it.
And it's just for 5 days? You didn't remember much?
For 5 days. So my brain, they say after 4 minutes without oxygen, you can suffer brain damage. And I had been out for 4 times that. So, I mean, between that and also the concussion I sustained putting my head through the wall, it was right in the corner of my closet where that little metal beam is at. So I have glimpses, little pictures kind of things, like I'm waking up in the ICU and there's my chief and some of the guys from my SWAT team and I'm passing back out. I'm waking up, I'm sobbing for some reason. I don't know why. I'm passing back out. Next thing I remember, I'm like slow dancing with my wife in the ICU and they're yelling at me to get back in the bed as I'm trying to take a piss. And like just little tiny things, like, something on the TV in the background. I remember, someone brought me orange jello, like just weird random things like that I could remember. But
Hmm.
they start going through all the motions and start doing all the tests to try to figure out what's going on. They run every test possible on me. They break my blood down to chromosomic levels, looking for genetic mutations and EKGs and MRIs and stress tests, and nothing. There's nothing wrong with my heart. There's no structural issues. There's no electrical complications. There's no genetic defects. There's no history. There's nothing. It just had one of those random electrical misfires that can happen to anyone, anywhere. And my ticket was punched. So
Wow.
they literally told me that we're going to put this AICD or a defibrillator in your chest. We don't know what caused your cardiac arrest, if it's going to happen again. So to be cautious, we're going to go ahead and put this in you because it will save your life. And literally overnight, I went from being a SWAT operator and a police officer to I'm being told that I might be forced into medical retirement. And I'm being told I lost my spot on the SWAT team and are kind of making plans to kick me out the door. And that just started the next steps in the journey. But I didn't know how far you wanted me to go in all this story because I know you probably have some questions too.
No, you're fine, man. You know what? One of the things I'm wondering is like, so if you're out of it for 16 and a half minutes, what are the after effects of that in the sense of like, so do you have any short-term memory issues or what does it do to your brain? Like, have they found any effects of that?
So, it, besides the death experience and what I experienced on the other side after that, the next 5 days, it's pretty normal. You know what I mean? Like what you experience with your brain going in and out, loss of memory, having these gaps. A lot of cardiac arrest survivors that I've dealt with internationally have brain fog. They've got, cognitive issues for a little while. Some of them were dead a lot longer than I was, have permanent brain damage. For me, I didn't have that. For the first 6 months or so, yeah, I would say I had some coordination issues, even more than usual. Like, just dropping your keys, stubbing your toe,
Okay.
just frustration, irritability, just the emotional roller coaster as your brain is kind of trying to reset. Not only did you have to face your mortality when I was fighting for my job, but I was also in this vulnerable state where my body had let me down. And you kind of go through this emotional roller coaster. And how many of us are truly prepared to not put that uniform on the next day?
Yeah.
We all know we could die. We all know we could get shot or hit or, struck by a bolt of lightning in the middle of the roadway or something. But we never really prepare for the medical side of what happens when you survive. Or do you have the finances to sustain yourself for the next, 6 months to a year? Do you have a backup plan? What are you going to do if you can't put that uniform on again? And that was something I had to tackle right away. But there was some brain fog, there was some memory gaps, and to this day, I still don't remember those 5 days afterwards. My wife and everybody has to kind of piecemeal it in, but I still regained all my memory, all my cognitive functions. I never had any other issues, but my wife would tell you that I was brain damaged before the event, so it works out.
Well, and what about that's a good point. You bring up the emotion side. So I never thought about that as an effect as well. But does it, as you're saying, as it's kind of resetting, the whole system's kind of resetting? You have some of these. Is it like outbursts? Is it like anger, or is it maybe it's even just dependent on the person? Like, is there a consistent theme that we see across people that come back from this?
But everyone's different. For me, it was these emotional waves, right? You'd go from moments of gratitude. I can't believe I'm alive. I shouldn't have made it. I was dead for 16 and a half minutes. Like, I was blessed. God blessed me with a second chance. Like, this is awesome. And then there was just like these, I never had that, oh shit, what if it happens again? I never had that, woe is me, or, why did this happen to me? I never had that. But I had an identity crisis. I
Mm,
was young, 26 years old. My identity was too entwined with the job. This is who I am. And that's bullshit. That's not who you are. It's what you do. And I literally saw myself as Brandon Griffith, the street cop, not Brandon Griffith, husband, father, friend, mountain biker, enthusiast, whatever you want to say. I didn't look at myself that way, and I had to deal with the effects of not being able to be part of that. And then, at first, everyone wants to help, and they're bringing you food, and they're checking in on you, and then you're kind of on an island by yourself. You're sitting at home in your thoughts, and they're keeping after they put this device in your chest, they don't want you to rip the lead out of your heart. So for months, while it's healing with the myocardial tissue, they kept me doped up. They didn't want me because I was overactive and I never stayed within the limits that I should. They
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
they worked with my wife and pretty much kept me doped up. So I went from very active lifestyle, being in SWAT and mountain biking and doing martial arts, to sitting on my ass, doped up and eating. So I'm gaining all this weight. I'm not part of the team. I'm not part of the stories. So my wife's afraid to leave me alone because I have a cardiac arrest again. She's got my SWAT team leader babysitting me. Like there's so many different things that when your body lets you down like that, that come to you. You're not used to that, especially when it happens internally. Like there's nothing you could have done to prevent it. I was in good shape. I was eating right. I was doing everything I was supposed to do. When that happens, it's kind of a shock on your body because you're like, man, this wasn't supposed to happen. But now that it did, how do I get back? How do I get back to my job? How do I get back to the guys? How do I get back to a sense of normalcy? You know what I mean?
Yeah. That's the exact word I was just thinking is kind of back to the normalcy. But I think a lot of it too, it sounds like, is the control aspect. So if I'm, out in the street and I'm going to walk up to a house or something, I feel like I have some amount of control, whether you do or don't. If someone's going to ambush you, they're going to ambush you. But there is still that sense of control. Like I can react, or I can, do this, or I can do that. But when something hits you like this, like there's nothing at all. So that is probably one of the scariest moments in your life, when something is fully out of your control, right? We don't like the things we don't understand. Then on the work side, so when you're coming back from this, what is the timeline like to recover from this? And you're saying on the work side of things, like right away, it's, hey, you're off this team and we might be medically retiring you. And how fast is that process? Like, are they giving you some time and there's like consultations of, hey, maybe you can't do this anymore? Or was it just like, hey man, you gotta retire?
my we had a chief that had just taken over at this time, and he was literally in there saying, no, we're going to take care of him. He was telling my wife and me in the hospital, and we're going to try to find a position on the civilian side of the house. And I was like, wait, what do you mean? And they're being replaced while I'm still in the hospital. I hadn't even had time to process my own death yet, and they are basically telling me that, you're damaged goods, like we can't let you come back. We're going to take care of you. We'll find another job for you, don't worry. And I was like, they never fathomed me. I never crossed my mind that I couldn't go back to being a cop anymore. So it was like, you got to be kidding me. And the doctors, man, there's nothing afterwards. And they don't give you any pamphlets or warnings or be like, oh, by the way, after you leave here, you might have this emotional roller coaster. Here's a support group. Here's this. Hey, you're one of the lucky ones. Good job. They snap you on the back and then kick you out the door. And you're like, well, is this going to happen again? We don't know. Is my defibrillator going to go off? What do I look for? Here's a manual for the device. Good luck. Like, what the hell? What just happened to me? Where do I go from here? There was nothing. There was no playbooks, and the survivor groups I reached out to only wanted to do like kumbaya group chats, but no actual answers. What are my rights to go back to work? What about workers' compensation? What about the ADA? Can they force me out? What about my legal? What about medication side effects? What about AICD complications? Like there was nothing. There was no playbook. So I was literally trying to fight back to work with nothing. This hadn't happened in our department. This hadn't happened in our state where a cop had survived this and gone back to full active duty. So I'm looking at my options and I was like, wait a minute. There's nothing wrong with my heart. There's no diagnosis. There's no issue here. Why can't I go back to work? I'm physically capable of doing everything. They're saying that I'm probably never going to have a cardiac arrest again. And if I do, I get shocked.
Yeah.
Why can't I go back to the retreats? So it was like, all right, well, now I'm not going to take no for an answer until you guys can give me a diagnosis or tell me that there's a reason why I can't go back to work. I'm going back to work. And I fought and I fought and I had to go against risk management and post. And luckily, my assistant chief at the time, Chief Mark Mann, had my back. And eventually, this cardiac arrest researcher and titan in the resuscitation field, Dr. Bentley Balbro, reached out to me. He's one of the creators of Hands-Only CPR with Dr. Kern at University of Arizona. At the time, he was the state EMS and trauma director. He calls me up and he wants to know about my cardiac arrest and he wants to chat. And we have this discussion in his office. And he wants me to be part of some of his research and help out and speak at some of his stuff. And I'm like, look, man, I'm not interested. I don't want to be a spokesperson. I don't want to be out there. Like, that's not what I want to do. I want to go back to work. I'll make a deal with you. You help me get my back to work. I'll come and speak at your thing and we'll kind of work together on this. And he agreed. And at the time, no one was going to argue with him being the EMS and trauma director. So he actually came in along with my EP and I said, there's no medical reason why he can't do the job. We don't know if he's ever going to have it. He's protected. He's on medication to prevent this. And it was probably about 6 months from there. Now I had to wait for the lead to heal in my heart. I had it buried underneath my pectoral muscle, so I had to kind of rehab that myself. I pushed it too far. I was out mountain biking when I shouldn't have. I ended up back in the hospital for 5 days. I had setbacks because anytime you gave me a threshold, they told me it'd probably be a year before I could go back to full active duty. I did it in 6 months.
Okay.
So I always want to make sure that I have the time. And it was about 6 months before I was successful in returning to it. And then when I get back to the field, it was like a whole new perception, a whole new point of view. And now I'm being treated different. At first, it's kind of like, well, can you do this with your heart condition, bro? Like they mean well, but they treat me like I'm this fragile China doll. So it took me a while to show. I had to outfight, I had to outrun, I had to outbench my guys just to show them that I'm not some fragile China doll. I'm not going to grab my chest like you see in the movies and keel over. I didn't have a heart attack. Everyone, that's what people think of. They think of heart attacks. They think of the old man sweating and grabbing his chest, having difficulty breathing. That's not what I had.
Yeah.
I had an electrical malfunction, and that's where people just have no concept of what heart disease really looks like, and that's an umbrella term. So when I got back to the field, that's when I realized how underutilized and unprepared law enforcement is when we're the ones that are on scene first 90% of the time. We're the ones pulling kids out of pools. We're the ones plugging bullet holes. We're the ones, dealing with overdose patients. We're the ones doing compressions on the side of the roadway. And most of the time, our training sucks. We're lucky if we get like a CPR AED class every, 1 to 5 years. And it's some bullshit class made for civilians. It's like, here's your CPR card. You call 911. You get an AED. And the laws that they're teaching you don't apply to us. You spend all of 2 minutes on a mannequin doing compressions and then go, hey, you're certified. And that was what most cops get. They'd be like, hey, here's how you put a tourniquet on, kid. Hopefully you don't have to use it. Get out there. And that's most of the extent of law enforcement training around the globe that I've seen. So some are very progressive and do awesome stuff, but I saw a real lack of systems. There was no protocols. There was no dispatch protocols. There was no policies. There was no legislative compliance. Cops weren't getting the equipment they needed. We're on scene first in the first 4 minutes doing compressions on somebody, and fire's not getting there for 7, 8, 20 minutes. It sucks doing compressions on someone going, when are they going to get here? If I
Yeah.
only had an 8, if I only had a chest seal, I would have been able to save this person's life. And that's kind of why I got steered towards starting the nonprofit and doing what we're doing today.
I think when it comes to the police services, a lot of the time they're just doing the bare minimum for liability's sake. And it is difficult, I guess, for some members. If some members come forward and say, hey, I got this great idea, the first thing anything management is going to ask is, how much is it going to cost? How many days away from work are you going to take my frontline workers or whatever it might be? So it's like a huge disconnect between the two levels. Unless you have some real progressive bosses that are willing to let you kind of run with some things. I've seen this in my own organization to an extent. You get some people with wicked ideas and you're like, that's going to save lives. And then it's just like, well, that costs a lot of money. So
But when you actually do the research and you actually look into it, you're like, this is a no-brainer. And you start really looking and diving into the numbers, not only for the risk of the public, but the risk of our own officers. Like, for instance, last year in the U.S., we had 1,176 fatal police shootings across the entire country. You know how many people died from motor vehicle accidents?
a lot more.
42,000.
Yeah.
60,000 died from uncontrolled bleeds. 107,000 died from drug overdoses, and almost 700,000 Americans died last year from heart disease. Are we more likely to take a life, or are we more likely to save a life? When you start looking at the numbers, do a public records request in your jurisdiction and start figuring out, look, most of the time your cops are going to be on scene in the first 1 to 4 minutes where we have the highest likelihood of stopping a bleed, resuscitating somebody with an AED, getting somebody out of a drug overdose, getting breaths back in a child after a drowning. We are the most underutilized component out there. And the reality is that we are at a 70 times higher risk for heart disease than the general public we serve. We have a 20-year less life expectancy, and we are 25 times more likely to die from a medical emergency than a violent encounter with the suspect. So if preservation of life is our highest priority, which we do everything to save lives, right? We write tickets to prevent motor vehicle accidents. We do drug arrests to prevent drug overdoses. Why aren't we focusing on getting our officers basic training? We're not making them EMTs. We're not making them medics.
Yeah.
We're teaching them how to do performance resuscitation, how to do some basic bleeding and trauma control. And we're giving them some tourniquets, some chest seals, some gauze, and some AEDs. It's really not that much of an investment for how much of a return you get. Our programs are quadrupling survival. We are increasing non-fire and EMS AD applications by 900%, and we are getting outstanding survival rates in communities. We're quadrupling it, and these people are walking away with brain function and able to contribute to society. They are voting for police officer bonds. They are supporting. They're bringing cookies. They're all about it. And this is a way to bring your community together instead of alienating it, and also protecting your own officers. There's plenty of times where it's not safe for fire and EMS to come in. When one of us have been shot or there's a medical emergency, they're out in the green zone or they're out in the safe area. We
Yeah.
can't wait. Being able to save your own fellow officer when they've been shot or stabbed or are having a cardiac emergency is vital.
So that's the thing that we do see up here. Uh, I haven't run into it too much with fire, but we only end up at like collisions with them most of the time where we might have to work on people. But it's with EMS. EMS is probably our biggest partner. And there are a ton of calls now where it's like if a weapon is even mentioned, it could be the most farcical kind of like story coming in. But if a weapon's even mentioned or there's like violence going on, they're going to wait a few blocks away. So even that few blocks we've had where, and our system's not great. I don't know what yours might be, how it might be set up, but so our EMS dispatch is separate from police. So EMS gets one set of information. And sometimes we've had, I could probably say like 5 or 6 times I've gone to a call where EMS is needed and they've just mixed up the street and avenue. So that puts them like complete opposite side. The bus that you're waiting for is opposite side of the city in some cases. And you're like, holy shit, like what am I going to do now? And in general, we're always short on EMS. We never have enough of them around. So yeah, like, we need to get some more training out there. I did want to kind of ask, like, so when you're doing some of this training, what do some of these programs look like? How realistic can we make them? And just maybe on the retention side. So how often do you have to do this training where you see like, okay, people are retaining it like every 6 months or a year? Are people going to keep that with them?
I am so glad you asked. So I'm going to throw out a bunch of numbers at you, and we're going to kind of dive into this.
Yeah, give her.
The reality is that the current system, when it comes to training, is not sufficient enough when it comes to law enforcement. These civilian classes that are made by such and such organization, where they come in and do a CPR card every couple of years, are not realistic to what we do. They don't have law enforcement considerations. They don't encompass tactics. They don't encompass preservation of evidence. They don't encompass any of our individual procedures. There's nothing out there like this. When I wanted to do this program, I would have been happy to bring in an outside organization. But what we saw was, the SWAT medics had awesome programs. They're out there doing programs with 18 Delta, where they're stabbing goats and sheep and doing bleeding control and trying all these different things. And those guys are squared away. They don't need this training. But it's our frontline officers that are getting handed blue babies. It's our frontline officers that are dealing with a person on the side of a roadway who's bleeding to death inside their vehicle as they're hemorrhaging out. They're the ones that don't get the training. So we had to go, okay, well, what works really well? And me and my guys all come from the SWAT background, from the tactics side. So what works best when it comes to firearms? Is it standing out and doing speed drills, shooting a piece of paper? Hell no, it's all force on force, right? When you do reality-based training, active shooter drills, when you do hostage rescue, and you're doing barricades, and your SWAT operators and your patrol guys are going out and getting reps in with sim rounds, that's where guys start building muscle memory. That's where guys start getting their realism. That's why, how many times have you seen cops go out and do force on force, and after they're done with sims, they're like, their heart's racing, some of them got the shakes. It's real, right? So we said, why isn't there any reality-based training for these life and death situations? We're already responding. We do it for shootings, and we only had 1,176 fatal police shootings last year. Why aren't we doing it for all this? So we basically took our program and we wanted to do kind of a crawl, walk, run. Yeah, we got to have some classroom. We got to talk about law and legal. We got to talk about procedure and the science and resuscitation behind it. Then we actually have to do hands-on skills building. And I'm not talking about sitting with a clicker mannequin. I'm talking about real data collection. So we use high-tech fidelity mannequins that actually record depth, recoil, fractionality limitations, perfusion to the brain. We want to compare them pre-training and post-training to see how much they've improved. And we also want to see how they do under stress. So after we do our skills building and we do hemorrhage control with wearable wounds and bleeding simulators and whatnot, we have them do all reality-based training. The whole last half of our one-day course is reality-based training scenarios, motor vehicle accidents, suicide attempts, drug overdoses, officer down drills, excited delirium. And they have actors screaming in their face, slitting their wrist, blood spurting. They've got to do Narcan on them. You see all these guys that have never done Narcan before opening the package and trying to pull the cap off. Well, there is no cap. So you see these guys they get to work out their deficiencies in a safe environment where someone's life is not actually on the line. We give them a blueprint to draw from. So being able to go through these scenarios with our evaluators, with experienced instructors, we can actually coach them and guide them along and get them doing high performance resuscitation, trauma care, basic, non-legal procedure, where we actually have them searching for weapons and handcuffing suspects and doing it. Because too often this training is segregated. You've got it's either a medical course or it's a tactical course, but they don't combine them for the frontline guys. So we have to take that and combine everything all into one course. We got it post-accredited. We've got it post-accredited or equivalent in over 6 different states now. We're running it across the nation. I'd love to bring it up to Canada if we can get a host agency involved with this. But we also do a 2-day train the trainer, and that's where agencies are getting their money's worth. We're doing a 2-day train the trainer where we show them the principles, the concepts, and guide them through it. And then they go back to their agencies and build the program based on their protocols, based on their needs. What does their community do? We teach them how to actually build out their own reality-based training scenarios and back it up. So then they go back to their agency and they say, all right, hey, this is what our protocols are. These are the calls that we're frequently seeing. This is what we want to run for training, chief. And this is what we're going to put together. And it just increases the value. Now, when it comes to the training side, the lowest average class score we've ever had is a 98.43 or 98%. We'll just leave it at that, right?
Yeah.
Now we're going back 6 months to a year later, and officers are still in the 90th percentile. The brains are getting better perfusion. Our programs are outlasting. Now, comparatively, in hospital, they have to do proficiency demonstrations every 60 days, like those programs like RQI.
Oh, really? Okay.
Physicians, nurses, they're doing every 60 days where they're going on, they roll in the little thing, they go out and they do their compressions on it. And that's what they do. Now, it's because after about 60 days, they find that their scores just plummet. But cops with reality-based training are graduating in the 98%, graduating in the 98% score, and a year later, they're still in the 90th percentile. So we're telling agencies, look, if you've got data collection devices like Relay Response, where you've got Laerdal mannequins that can record data, test them out, bring a mannequin into briefing. Why would you pull your guys off the road for a 2 to 4 hour CPR AED class every 2 years if they're still in the 90th percentile?
Yeah.
Look at what their proficiency is, and if you have accreditation standards or whatnot, you can download Relay Response on their watch or their smartphone, go on a mannequin and say, hey, look, our guys are killing it right now. Do we really need to be worrying about this? Let's schedule something for next year. Now we're starting to see scores starting to dip. Let's schedule another training. That way it saves money. It keeps our officers on the streets, and we're not just doing a box check, protocol or BS course. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and like I was saying kind of at the beginning, the only thing that we get up here right now is once every 3 years, you go do your CPR basic first aider. And it is on those, like, just the generic mannequin, like the top torso. It's some of that. And I find like, I don't know if the acronyms change, but even when I go back in 3 years, I'm like, is that the same acronym they had for what we're supposed to do? And like the compression to breath ratios, I feel like changes sometimes.
Yeah, you're still doing breaths up there?
Yeah.
Oh, geez, dude. All right. Well, look, when you start looking at the resuscitation science, they found that cops should not be doing breaths, all right? Cardiac resuscitation is where it's at.
Yeah.
When you are doing compressions, you can't do 2 things good at once, right? When you're stopping compressions to give breaths, on average, it takes almost 18 compressions just to build enough pressure to get blood flow all the way up to your brain. When you're stopping to give breaths, you have to reestablish that pressure again. So the brain is getting very little perfusion during that. And on top of that, when they start doing the breaths, most of the time, people are hyperinflating or they're putting too much pressure in there, and it causes what's called interthoracic pressure. The sac around the heart pushes down on it. So basically the heart cannot fully refill with blood, and it decreases venous output. It is actually counterproductive to survival. Now, when Dr. Kern did his study with cardiocerebral resuscitation, they found that your red blood cells can carry oxygen for something like 14-something minutes, right? So by doing continuous compressions, you are circulating the oxygenated blood that's already in there. Because your body, when you are alive and when you are awake, 81% of your oxygen goes to what? Muscles contracting and moving. When you're in cardiac arrest, blood diverts to your brain and vital organs. So you've got an 81% oxygen reserve that you get to tap into because your muscles are not moving, they're not contracting right now. You can circulate that blood for something up to like 14 something minutes. Do they need respiratory therapy eventually? Yes. But the reality for most cops, if they get on scene in the first 3 to 4 minutes and they start working on somebody, is fire and EMS probably going to be there within the next 10? Yeah. And if they compare it with defibrillation, if you can get a defibrillator on somebody in the first, 3 to 5 minutes, you can drastically increase survival. So, I mean, when it comes to cops doing breaths, it doesn't make sense to me. You can take the best respiratory therapists out there, you can take the best nurses, and they can't maintain seals. You put them under our stress, you put them in the field with us, they don't know what they're doing, and most of the time these guys are hyperinflating as well. So it drives me nuts when you see this because there's no data collection. These classes that are out there, they're made for the lowest common denominator, not
Yeah.
for what are doing. And you know this with firearms. These are perishable skills. Front sight trigger control. Same thing with compressions. If you're not getting your 2 to 2.4 depth, if you're not allowing for full recoil, if you're not practicing the way you play and actually recording that and giving continuous quality improvement, you don't know what the hell you're doing. When you get out there, you got these guys that are crushing chests. They're either going too fast, they're going too slow, and it's causing more harm than good. So it's like, take the time to do it the right way if you're going to do it.
I say even some of the times you're given, it's like that's if you're in a major city. If you go out and like for us, it's the RCMP, and you're out in like gravel roads somewhere. Yeah, you could be waiting like 30 minutes to 45 minutes till an ambulance shows up. So yeah, you could be really shit out of luck. Some of those.
That's why the defibrillation and the AED component is so important. I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but
No,
that's
go
what
ahead.
drives me nuts about this is getting cops the AEDs they need because the heart needs defibrillation. CPR does not save lives. We've all heard that saying, CPR saves lives. That's bullshit. CPR delays death. It manually circulates blood long enough for someone to get shocked out of that deadly arrhythmia. They don't get it, eventually they go into cellular death. So they need to get that defibrillation. If your cops are not having AEDs and you got response times that are 20, 30 minutes out, you were doing a disservice to your community.
I think we only have, as far as I know, we only have the AEDs in our buildings, but I don't even think they're in a supervisor car. Like you'd have to get it from somewhere and take it out.
And that's one of my biggest pet peeves too, is the supervisor car thing.
Yeah.
They get them and they're like, put it in the supervisor's car. When was the last time your supervisor was on scene first for an incident?
Yeah, well, depends on the supervisor. I won't out anybody here, but yeah, we know.
Not calling anybody up, but I'm saying if you were on a scene and you need something like a breaching kit,
Yep.
Are you going to wait 10 minutes for a sergeant to show up with a breaching kit or an AED? Or are you going to kick in the door, bust a window, or find another way in?
Yeah, exactly. You know what? And you're not wrong. You're not wrong at all. The up here too, I mean, we got to deal with the temperature swings. So I think like they were having issues with some of the naloxone. And if you just have that in your pocket, right? And then all of a sudden you're outside standing in -40 for a while, or you're holding a point, like that stuff isn't going to be effective or frozen. The other reason for not doing CPR, unless like you have one of those covers, right? The face seals, like people got fentanyl on them. People got all kinds of things on them. So it's like, I think a lot of cops in general would be hesitant to really do anything outside of just chest compressions if they don't have the right tools.
That's what we found. We have all these agencies around the nation that I've consulted for that have spent money like you wouldn't believe on bag valve masks and O2 and all kinds of cool stuff for their guys. And when you do a public records request, how many times are they used? Maybe once a year.
Mm-hmm.
Cops will not. They will intentionally leave it in their vehicles. They do not want to do breaths. They don't want to put their mouths on people. They don't want to maintain seals. Cops are very, very good at perishable skills like firearms, and it comes to compressions. Cops are very good at doing cardiocerebral resuscitation. We've been doing a 3-year study, and we can prove that cops are better than nurses and doctors at it because we're very good, we're very competitive, and we retain information better than the general public. We are hardwired to work under stress and pressure, unlike any other profession for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
So when you start looking at the data, why would you risk that and mess it up by causing atherosclerotic pressure? Why would you go down and give breaths and risk disease transmittal? Why would you do that and risk hurting the patient more than you can? Even if you've got 2 guys there, if I can have one guy applying the AED as rapidly as possible and doing CCR, why wouldn't I? You know what I mean? And that's where the areas where we've been able to implement this, when cops are doing hands-on CPR with rapid defibrillation, we are quadrupling survival. We're not getting 1 or 2, we're getting dozens of saves. And that's what's making the difference, is that it's not when you talk to me about your dispatch protocols and being on separate channels and whatnot, it makes sense to me now that why you've only done CPR once in your law enforcement career. You're not getting dispatched to it. As soon as someone calls and says, my wife collapsed, she's not breathing, my husband's bleeding out, it goes to fire and EMS. And by the time they input the information, dispatch an engine or dispatch a bus, all of a sudden they go back and go, oh, can we tell the local PD? And they kick back to you guys when they're already in response. No wonder you guys aren't getting on scene first. You're not being co-dispatched. If you're not getting sent at the same time, we're not 4 guys sitting on a fire truck at a fire station or 2 guys on the ambulance waiting for a call out. We are actively patrolling in the fields. We are in the neighborhoods where 4 out of 5 cases happen. So you get 70% to 80% of cardiac arrests happen inside the home. If we're on a BS barking dog call or taking a civil complaint and someone's dying 2 blocks away, are we going to be able to, hey, man, I got to go. Someone's dying. I'll be right back. Yeah, absolutely. We can break from non-priority traffic. But the fire department and EMS guys, if they've got a diabetic patient who's hypoglycemic, can they toss them a Snickers and say, good luck, someone's worse than you down the road, right? No, they're stuck with that patient. They have advocate response. So just like the day I had my cardiac arrest, I lived half a mile from the fire station. Those guys were on a call. So the next closest unit got dispatched. Well, they were on a car accident. So the next closest unit got dispatched. But it took them 9.5 minutes to get to me.
Wow.
It's not because they were trying to. They did a phenomenal job and they saved my life. I'm not knocking them by any means. But that's the way that EMS system is set up. The closest unit after that gets dispatched.
Yeah.
That's why cops are so vital when it comes to this medical response. Simply getting your cops an IFAC or a medical bag for basic hemorrhage control and getting them an AED is going to be able to tackle with some basic training. You're going to be able to tackle 90% of the stuff you come across.
Yeah. Just as we kind of come up to the end of our time here, I just wanted to ask about, so you had some of the congressional recognition that I mentioned at the beginning, and this has to do with some of your life-saving programs, but also some of your actions as a police officer. Is that for saving lives? Have you put any of the stuff that you've done or from your courses into action since? I imagine so.
I have, man. I've been very, very fortunate. I've been able to receive. I've been accredited with over a dozen life saves with my own 2 hands. I've been a part of a dozen more with OITs and other officers I've been with. I've been able to get the heroism award. I've been able to get I've been very fortunate. I've been in the right place at the right time, and I've been strategically put in certain areas. So I've been able to really use my skills. And in fact, tell you a quick story, man. When I first started law enforcement, before I became a cop, when I was working doing hotel security, we used to have this cop that would respond to the property. And I ended up working with him a lot, and he knew that I was going to the police academy. And while I was in the police academy, he was ambushed and killed. I never got to tell him. We weren't that close. We just knew each other as, passing friends type thing. Well, after my cardiac arrest, when I first returned to full active duty, my first OIT assigned to me was his little brother. And I had no idea he even had a brother.
Wow.
So working with him, and I'm talking about things happening for a reason. And, sure enough, a couple weeks into his first phase of FTO with me, we get a hot call for a rollover vehicle accident. People said the driver had slumped over the wheel before crashing. So I'm already thinking, is this a brain aneurysm, a cardiac arrest? Is this, a diabetic patient? I don't know what's going on, but we got to go. So this is his first time driving code 3. He's using his turn signals and whatnot. I'm like, hurry and just haul ass, man. Let's go. Show up on scene. Of course, I've got AED on here. We bust the window, cut the seatbelt, we extricate the guy. We start doing compressions on him, man. That wave of emotions comes back, man. At first, I was switching off with my OIT, but after about the second switch off, I was just like, I'm staying right here. I was like a rabid pit bull. I was like, I'm not letting this guy die. And I just continued to work on him. We were shocking him, using refractory. Fire and EMS come, they IO him. We worked on him for 18-something minutes. Finally, we get a pulse back in the back of the ambulance. So I'm telling you, man, we're doing compressions on him. This is the first time I was able to do, compressions since my cardiac arrest, and just like this wave, I'm literally, there's tears going down my eyes as I'm going through, just thinking about everything, right? I'm trying to give back and earn my second chance. And anyway, I tell the fire captain, I'm like, hey man, do me a favor, give me a call later on. Let me know what's going on with this guy. Like, it mean a lot to me. He goes, sure. They go to the hospital. He gives us a call later in the shift and says, hey man, just want to let you guys know you guys did a hell of a job. But, from the crash, he's got irreversible spine and brain damage. Like, he's a vegetable. So now I'm like, it was like a gut punch, man. Like, what the hell did I do? I wouldn't let this guy die. Now this guy's in a vegetative state. His family has to make the decision to pull the plug. Like, Anyway, we're going along the shift, and my OIT's kind of bummed out about it. I'm like, yeah, things happen for a reason, man. Next thing we know, we get a phone call. The doctor and the mom want us to come to the hospital. So I'm like, all right, what am I going to say to this poor woman? I put her in this horrible predicament. Like, I'm trying to hold back my own emotions. I walk into the ER, and she gives me the biggest hug, and she wants to thank us, and I'm like, thank me for what? Like, I just put her in this poor predicament, and she's like, not only did I get to say goodbye to my son, but he is an organ donor, and because of the quality of CPR you guys did, his organs are going to go on to save many other lives. And I think they harvested over like 23 something organs and tissue and skin cells
Wow.
to help other people because of what we did. And that's something that never crossed my mind before. I never once thought like, maybe it's not going to get the save that you think, but this could lead to other lives saved, and it impacted a whole bunch of other families that got kidneys and hearts and all kinds of other stuff because of the quality we did. So that was one of the ones that was really impactful on me in starting Griffith Blue Heart nonprofit, and wanted to get a higher caliber of training, a system of care, and life-saving equipment in law enforcement's hands. It was something that really drove that. But yeah, I got to use tourniquets. I got to do, chest seals. I got to do several life saves with my own two hands and give it back. But what's been most gratifying is implementing programs for entire agencies. When I get that phone call, hey, we just used our AED, we just saved a 1-year-old. Or hey, we just slapped a tourniquet on somebody. All right, we just got a Narcan save. Knowing that you had something to do with that and training their officers and getting them the equipment, when you get those calls, man, it makes your day, especially when a fellow officer is saved. When they say, hey, one of our officers just had a cardiac arrest and we were able to use this, or one of the guys went down in the station, like, dude, it is so rewarding. You get this huge sense of righteousness, and that's what really drives me, because I never in a million years thought that I would leave full time law enforcement after my cardiac arrest. But I dropped to reserve so I could run the nonprofit full time because it's more fulfilling, than I can make a bigger impact doing this than I could ever do individually on the streets.
Yeah.
So being able to entire programs and stay a reserve officer and serve my county the way I'm doing now, it is so intensely gratifying.
That's an amazing story, man. And you know what? I'm glad that somebody's out there doing it, because it's definitely, I guess it'd be hard enough coming back and doing the work full time. But now you're doing two jobs and you're saving more lives. Like you said, doing some of this stuff outside of the policing world, you're probably going to touch on more people. With that, the Blue Heart nonprofit, can you talk a little bit about this, how it works, and like, you're operating up US wide, I guess?
We are. So we are a 501c3 not for profit organization based here in Arizona, but we work with agencies around the country. I mean, a couple of weeks I'll be going to Virginia. We've got some in Washington State. We're going to Hawaii. We're going to California. We consult and work with agencies all over. I have consulted for some organizations outside of the country. When it comes to systems of care, when it comes to everybody else, there's nobody else out there doing law enforcement, systems of care, medical response, or resuscitation, right? We're pretty much the only ones out there that have taken the components from law enforcement and medical and put it together to do this. So we are operating all over the nation and helping out agencies and optimizing their programs. Sometimes it's little tiny tweaks like, hey, look at your dispatch protocols, or let's write a chain of, let's write a policy up for your guys, or let's tweak this a little bit. All of a sudden they're getting a ton of more saves, or hey, let's get a grant for you guys. Let's donate, tourniquets or AEDs or whatever it is. So we do get a lot of support. We do fundraisers. We do take donations. If anybody wants to contribute, we're at griffithblueheart.com. There's a donation button on our homepage, or if they want to come out to be part of our events, we are more than happy to take that and put that into law enforcement resuscitation programs.
Awesome stuff. Usually I kind of end with giving you some time to just say how people can follow you. So where can they find you, all the social media websites? And I'll make sure I put them up in the episode description as well. But where's the best place to get a hold of you or any of the businesses?
So if you go to griffithblueheart.com, that's going to be our website. We've got a contact page on there. I'm Brandon Griffith is on LinkedIn if you want to look me up. We just recently started an Instagram page. I'll be honest, I suck at social media. I've never wanted social media, but it's an absolute necessary for the nonprofit. So
Yeah.
we're still learning. We don't have a marketing manager. It's a bunch of knuckle dragging street cops running this stuff. So you can find us on there.
It just turns into cool gun videos or something. You're like, this has nothing to do with what we're doing. That's awesome. And you know what? I just, as we were chatting here, I looked up my fault at the beginning, my error. I mixed up the last line in your bio there. So yours said with 2 children, 2 daughters. I was writing up a couple bios and I mixed up the last lines there. So my apologies for that.
Oh, no worries, man.
You know what? It was awesome to have you on here. Definitely very unique, novel idea. And you're doing stuff that nobody else is doing. So, that, hey, all the best to you. I want to remind everybody to like, share, and comment and spread the message because it's the only way we kind of get this stuff out there. And you know what? The more people doing it, the better. So help out. And yeah, if you get a chance, donate and hit up Brandon if you got any questions. So I want to say thanks for coming on today, Brandon, and hang on the line for 2 seconds. I'll talk to you offline.
Thank you, brother.